Chapter 4. Helen did not see her young princess for hours, and she was getting worried when dinner time rolled around. She hesitantly walked up to Lady Nelina, who was at the headboard with a goblet of wine and a book. Um, pardon me, milady, Helen muttered. Nelina looked up from her book and smiled. Yes, Helen. Um, well, milady, I was just wondering if you had seen Princess Celine? Nelina chuckled. Oh, don't you worry, Helen. The children will run in late for dinner like always. Sit and eat with me, please. I'm intrigued to hear about life on the Isles, Nelina invited. Putting her book to the side and timidly, Helen sat. Before long they were visiting away, and Helen had nearly forgotten about her princess when around the second course in rolled three dirty children. They were laughing, and twigs, dirt, and other several stains streaking across all their clothing. There was almost more sand on them than what would be on a beach. Helen was almost dead with shock and was about to get up and rush to her princess when the three children ran right up to Nelina. Black-haired girl smiled at Nelina and Helen. Beg your pardon, milady. Might we wash up for supper? She bobbed a little curtsy. Helen was about to say something, but when she looked at Celine's dirty face, those violet eyes alight with happiness, her disapproval died in her throat. Celine smiled at her for the first time since she had left her mother. Weakly, Helen smiled back as Celine giggled. Of course, children. Aubrey, Niall, you know the cleaning spell. Why not use it to tidy yourselves and Celine up? Nelina asked them. Nelina quietly led them through the spell. The two children stumbled but continued, and the dining hall waited patiently until they were all cleaned up. Now you can sit down, children, and eat. Then you will join the servants in washing dishes after dinner, as you have already broken my rules about leaving the courtyard without an adult. Nelina invited them, and soon the three children were sitting together, eating quickly and chatting a mile a minute. Helen caught the eye of Fidelius, and they beamed at each other, relieved that Celine was smiling again. That night, when the children were all supposed to be tucked in bed, Celine woke up to the bright blue eyes of Niall reflecting on the light of her fireplace. Come on, let's go up the tower to explore, he whispered, as not to disturb Helen sleeping on a trundle bed in front of the fireplace. Celine giggled as she crawled out of bed, and they ran up the tower. Nelina had set up a large tower for practicing her magic, and at the top of it was a large astronomy tower allowing her to observe the stars and the planets. Aubrey was already waiting for them, with a laugh they hid under a blanket and talked about the stars. The next 5 days settled the Isles folk to the manor. Nelina refused to tell them of her history or how she knew these children to be powerful. Later, she always claimed, for they were not complete. Still, she couldn't get over how easily the three had settled together, which only convinced her more that what she was doing was right. Celine's innocent questions and her stupidity from backwoods raising never got any teasing words from her comrades. Niall's pedigree didn't matter, nor the color of Aubrey's black skin, something that many on this side of the Salt River had never seen. Until their group was complete, the children studied simple arithmetic and fighting skills. There was screaming and shouting, running and jumping. Helen tried to keep Celine in dresses and finally gave up, allowing her charge to wear old pants and baggy shirts. One day, the trio was running down the stairs with a man at arms, thinking to go to the beach when a large party rode in through the gates. The three children halted uncertainly. In the middle of this large group of men in arms, bearing Westholt's crest, was a fine-looking dainty gray pony. On this pony was a little girl wrapped in a pale blue wool cloak. Braided pale brown hair fell over one shoulder. However, when she spotted the other children, she cried out and jumped off her pony. She hurried over and threw herself at Niall, who hugged her back hard, lifting her off the ground half a foot. I'm so happy you made it here. I was so worried for you, she muttered into his neck as he squeezed her tight. When he finally set her down, he was touched to see a trickle of tears leaving her eyes as she smiled up at him in happiness. Oh, I'm so excited to finally meet you all. Aubrey, Niall, and Celine, it's so nice to meet you, she said as she turned to the others. She wiped her eyes with her hands. I beg your pardons. I'm Princess Adeline of Westholt. I'm a prophet and a seeress. I I have dreamed about you. She smiled at them. You brought quite a few men with you, Niall noted, a bit guardedly. Father's orders. Oh, Aubrey, I brought some herbs from my mother's gardens that I knew you were getting low on. She shrugged dismissively. She had accepted her father's protectiveness long ago. Then Adeline reached out and took Celine's hand. Celine flinched and went to pull away until she looked into the genteel eyes of this girl. She was captivated by the soft brown eyes. Celine, I saw what happened, and when I told my father about it, he dug out something for you. Before your parents were betrothed in the Civil War in Westhold, there was talk about your mother marrying my father, and they had several miniatures drawn of her for my father. He found them and said you could have them. She squeezed Celine's fingers before she turned and dug into a saddlebag of the gray pony. Celine's eyes were wide, and she was stock still as Adeline lifted a velvet bag from the saddlebag. She offered it to Celine, who took it with shaky fingers, then handed Aubrey a packet full of dried herbs. Celine pulled out the first miniature of a necklace locket, which she opened. Tears began to fill her eyes. Her mother's soft eyes stared back at her. Rosabelle looked much younger than Celine had ever seen her, but the artist had done well at capturing her genteel spirit. Celine pressed the locket to her chest and looked at Adeline. No words, Adeline whispered to her. Niall and Aubrey crowded around to peer over Celine's shoulder at the miniatures. You look just like her, Celine, Aubrey whispered. Niall exhaled deeply. She's so beautiful. The children were so mesmerized that they almost leapt out of their skin when Nelina came up behind them. What a beautiful miniature of your mother, Celine. Welcome, Princess Adeline. I see you've already met the other children. Perhaps they would like to show you to your room. Children, Adeline's room is in the northeast corner of the house, she told them. She turned to the head guard of Adelaide's retinue as the children hurried away. Your trip was a fine one, Owen. He straightened up and smiled at her. Aye, Lady Nelina. King Bernard requested that you keep as many men as you need and send the rest back to his capital, he explained. She eyeballed the 30-some men milling around. I think between 10 and 15. I suspect Queen Mildred would like to leave a few men with her granddaughter, but I can comfortably house these men as long as they willingly work to help bring in crops and around the village. He nodded before excusing himself to go make arrangements. As the children headed up the stairs, Adeline felt the urge to clarify with the others a bit of her powers. I put up a block so I can't always read minds. Can you see what is happening to other people often? Celine asked as they got to Adeline's new room. Not often. I mostly get visions in my sleep, but I can't wait for Nelina to teach me enough control so I can do it while I am awake. I dreamt of each of you, and the time I saw you, Celine, was that day when your powers were revealed on the Isles. Adeline paused to exclaim in delight when she saw the room. What did you see when you saw me? Aubrey asked with a guarded face. Adeline hesitated as she studied Aubrey. Aubrey did not know her age, but she looked around 12 or more. She didn't have the look of royalty like Celine and Adeline did, for those two were extremely well bred on the royal scale. That was what generations of inbreeding had done. But Aubrey didn't have the common looks of a peasant. Her face had sharp features, her hair was a jet black, and she looked to be at least nobility. Niall, too, shared such looks, a slight bone structure to the jaw that wasn't quite peasant. I couldn't remember part of it, but I could sense that I dreamed of the day you were lost at sea. I watched you get picked up by the slavers. She stopped, unsure how much more of Aubrey's history she should reveal as she stared into the black eyes of the older girl. Aubrey gave her a strained smile. It was an awful day. I hadn't told any of you because I didn't want you to think less of me. I don't know where I come from. My first memory is being pulled out of the water. Lady Nelina brought me from the slave pens. She outbid a brothel madam for me, which I'm eternally grateful. Aubrey's voice was soft, and she looked calm, but tight fists belied her nervousness. My mother was the mistress to a nobleman, and when she died of a spring cold, I became a street rat until I was guided here, where Nelina rescued me, Niall stated. I'm an exiled princess whose father hunts down to kill and who has burnt countless magic wielders at the stake. I'm like you two, abandoned. Lady Nelina is my last chance, Celine pointed out logically. They all looked at Adeline, who looked disappointed. Hmm, my family loves me, and my father had to be persuaded into allowing me to leave. I'm being groomed for a marriage to a desert prince, but it was finally agreed that I could go, Adeline explained with an apologetic shrug. Celine was the first to laugh. Poor you for being the oddball, she giggled, and the others laughed as well, and the ice was broken. The next few days included Adeline in their studies. She proved to be a bit of a book nerd, but was awful with the fighting classes. It was rather a hoot watching her fumble through bow and arrows and with the wood sword. In that time, a letter came from the King Regan finalizing his niece's tutelage underneath the Lady Nelina, and he also sent along a small allowance for her and her servants. And still Lady Nelina resisted speaking of why they were all drawn to her. Soon enough she claimed. Out of all the girls already at the manor house, Adeline was the easiest to put into dresses. In fact, with Adeline it was hard for her to be comfortable in pants. She was stubbornly trying to stay in her dress during her sword lessons. Finally, after a lesson that was rather teary, Aubrey made a sketch while sitting at lunch. Adeline, why not try something like these? Aubrey asked, and offered her the page. On it was a pair of loose-fitting pants that would not show off the princess's body well, allowing her to move about freely. Oh, that is perfect! Thank you, Aubrey. Can I take this to the dressmaker? Adeline asked eagerly, and when Aubrey gave her consent, Adeline took the paper and hurried off. So far, they hadn't done any magic classes. Besides Celine being taught rudimentary controls, the rest of them already knew. When they complained about this, Lady Nelina merely tutted at them all. Patience, pets. We aren't yet complete in our group. But she would say nothing else. Instead, while Celine was practicing controlling flames and her gifts, the rest were making potions for colds and poultices. Adeline was the quickest of these, where Niall easily could have been just as quick, but he thought it beneath him. Nelina, overseeing everyone's work, scolded him. Honestly, Niall, this long and you've only made a single potion. There is nothing wrong with being able to make up healing potions. What if you wander the world alone without anyone else to help you? She turned to the girls. Good, Aubrey. All right, children, that's enough for today. Run along and play for a bit before your sword fighting class. As the children left the workspace, they asked Adeline if she knew about the expected group members, but she admitted that she had no idea of who was arriving next, as she had kept her shielding spells up. That evening after dinner in the customary baths, Adeline was preparing for bed when she spoke her few enchantments, lifting the block on her seeing. "Milady?" questioned her lady's maid. Adeline smiled at her as she climbed between the pre-warmed sheets. "I feel like I need to dream freely tonight. It might be best for you to sleep in another room." The maid nodded, as she had been with Adeline since she was a young girl. She knew during these visions Adeline would frequently talk, sometimes cry or scream, and thrash often. She was also impossible to awaken, but the maid never left her alone, although the little princess did not know this. Adeline fell into a deep sleep, her body relaxing, but her mind fully awake as she began to walk a familiar path. While Adeline visited the dream world, there was another approaching the manor. The party of men-at-arms were quite relieved to have the light of the full moon, for the forest that they had rode through looked terrifying. It was not a well-traveled road, and there was plenty of wildlife roaming the forest. They could hear the shrieks of forest cats and howls of wolves. There was only one in their party not terrified. She had fallen asleep long ago, and her trusty-looking mountain pony plodded along, taking care of her burden. However, even if she had been awake, she would not have been terrified. The other horses were nervous and were close to each other. However, the pony held no fear for the animals just inside the bushes. The animals of the forest drew in close, wanting to be near the little one riding on her pony. Two large prairie cats prowled beside the pony. Prairie cats were the guard animals of the Heartlands. Long ago they had been domesticated by one of the Heartland queens. Though the wild ones were far more lethal and could harm the animals that the Heartlands raised, their own prairie cats protected them. Large tusk-like teeth and shaggy tan coats for the most of them, though it was not unusual to have a white cat born. They were incredibly fast over distances. These two were young cats, barely a year old and bound completely to their slumbering child. The men-at-arms had their hands on their swords, however they did not go close to the pony, for she did not like to be crowded and was known to kick, unless her rider was able to persuade her otherwise. And the cats did not look anxious either, as other animals began to crowd close to their party, just out of torchlight. They were used to animals wanting to see their human. When the group finally broke from the woods, they came upon a village, but the smoke coming from the chimneys told them that they were not in a haunted village. However, the leader urged them past the small inn and the houses built of stone to a large wall, then over the lower drawbridge onto the courtyard of what should have been a castle. Instead, there was the manor house. The few men on guard were strong and powerful, but they let this party pass in peace. Ugh, I hate traveling in the dead of night like this. Only bad things lurk in the dark, a knight muttered to his fellow travelers as they stopped their weary beasts in the courtyard. Aye, why did Mikhail demand we ride through the night? A second man-at-arms muttered, staring at the dark corners of the courtyard. Many buildings lurked in the corners, and he pulled his reins taut, causing his horse to shift nervously. Because Mikhail knew that once you were on my lands that naught would disturb you, stated a feminine voice from the shadows, and a hooded figure stepped from the shadows in front of the large stone house. Every man except the headman leapt with nerves and then drew swords before looking over at her. Their leader, who had already dismounted, knelt his respects with a bowed head before standing and lifting the small figure from the pony, who eyed him like she would like to bite him. He cradled the child delicately in front of him. The hooded figure moved closer, ignoring the men-at-arms, who clustered closer to their leader protectively. It's fine, lads. Put your swords down, he rumbled. And while the men-at-arms lowered their swords, no one put them away. Then the lady pulled her hood down. The moonlight struck her silver hair and made it glow. The men-at-arms instantly put their swords away, awestruck by her looks. She ignored them, brushing past them to smile at Mikhail and then looked down at his bundle. She gently pulled away the hood covering the child's head, exposing a young face with soft black curls surrounding the baby fat. Her skin was a dusky olive. She took one of the princess's hands and turned it over, studying the rough, calloused little palm. A rough houser she must be with palms like this. She'll get along well with my other charges. Come, let us go inside and you can hand her and her maid off to my housekeeper, she stated, setting the child's hand back before turning and walking away. Stable boys were suddenly there, taking weary mounts as men-at-arms followed their captain, with his wee burden. The prairie cats followed closer to the princess, and the servants of the manor blanched observing them. Careful with the pony, she's a right handful, warned a man-at-arms to the stable boy who reached for the pony's reins. He observed her cautiously and then offered her a handful of oats from his pocket. His bribe was well accepted, and the pony went off without as much as a nip. Mikhail faltered as the slim short woman hurried over to take the child and carried her to the chambers away from the cheerfully lit hall. Are we the last ones to arrive? He asked suspiciously, for he had thought they had made good time. No, the first to arrive within days of each other over a month ago. Then poor little Princess Celine from the Isles a month ago, Lady Nelina stated. And then the latest arrived. She was interrupted by a small, ageless voice. Is the Princess Mathilde here yet? I know she will love the chambers we chose for her. Mikhail nearly stopped breathing as he set eyes upon the almost fairy-looking child. Her eyes moved from the woman to Mikhail, the hint of greater knowing in her eyes. Hello, Mikhail. I come from the capital of Westhold. I have traveled to my Lady Nelina's side, where I can learn the most of my craft and meet the great sorceresses and sorcerer of the coming age. I am Princess Adeline, daughter of King Bernard and Duchess Isadora. Lady Nelina knelt in front of Adeline, and she ran her hand through the child's curls, tucking them behind her ear. You know, my little Adeline, that you have to wait till the morning before you can meet the newest sorceress, and you also know that you have to go to bed, my little princess. I knew you were going to say that, but to be fair, I was in bed, but I had another vision of another who needs your help. A young girl whose village south of here plans on sacrificing her, for they have just discovered her powers. I drew a map from memory of my vision before I forgot it, as you had suggested, my lady. If you leave tomorrow in the morning, you will have just enough time to rescue her from the flames. She offered Nelina a small piece of folded-up parchment that had been concealed in her small hand. Gravely, Lady Nelina took the parchment, and her eyes turned thoughtful as they studied her young charge. I will discuss this with you tomorrow, my dear. For now, off to bed with you, my darling. Recast your spells for good sleep for the rest of the night, she said as she kissed her on the forehead. Adeline turned to the leader and the exhausted waiting woman beside him, who looked like she was going to fall over and sleep right there on the floor of the great hall. Follow me, miss. I can show you yours and Matilda's bedroom. Lady Nelina says we may share rooms when we find who will suit best, but for now, until our magical powers become accustomed to each other's, it is best to give everyone room, Adeline said as the lady's maid accepted and followed her with some of Matilda's luggage. Nelina indicated for the men to sit as she sat at one of the trestle tables to have a drink of ale one of the housemaids brought them. I might be running down to the southern kingdom to find another girl. I must see what my dreams tonight bring. Mikkel settled beside her at the table, taking a big swig of ale. My lady, I'm not sure my queen would like you leaving the second heir to her throne alone here. She cut him off with a dismissive flick of her hand. Nonsense! I have lived on this land since before your grandfather lay with your grandmother. None have attacked my lands ever for fear of my men, my defences, and of course my powers. And the added force of King Bernard's and Queen Mildred's men mean none shall attack here. I do not leave my home or my charges undefended. Sheepishly, Mikkel nodded his head, scolding himself mentally, for he should have known that the mysterious Lady Nelina would have plenty enchantments on her lands. For even the bold and brash northern kings dare not trespass upon her land. They plagued his own queen relentlessly, but all left these mystical forces alone. Would you like to accompany me, Mikkel? Your little Mathilde will be well protected. I will only require 5 men to travel with me, assuming we travel at all. She asked him, and he hesitated, thinking he should stay with his charge, but realized that combined with all the men in arms there was well over 50 warriors and a large wall. Assuming we go, I'll be happy to escort you, my lady. He consented, and she smiled before finishing her ale and standing up. Well, gentlemen, my servants will give you some stew and bread, and my own head man can show you where you all to sleep during your stay here. Have a good night, she called, lowering her head in a little bow, and swept away before any of the men could even speak. The one man who believed they shouldn't be traveling at night grinned and reached over to the neighbor to break bread. Well, Mikkel, the years until our princess's return home aren't going to be boring ones. He winked at the maid, who giggled as she sashayed away to bring some stew to the boys.